These guys both work with the organization up the front. Let's see, we have one more panelist, and I saw Rohit run in the wrong direction. All right, that's probably good. I'll wait for Rohit. But I can, there he is. So thanks everybody for coming. My name is Matt Gordon. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of Climate Tech Action Network. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. A few notes before we get started. In September, we're going to be having an event on navigating an equitable EV transition in conjunction with the Berkeley Center for Law Education, Law, Energy, and the Environment. You should come to that. This is going to be one of our first non-technical panels. It's going to be around social justice. I have a lot of questions around what happens in 2035 when California bans the sale of internal combustion engines and how that is going to impact supercommuters, communities of color, people who live in apartments and don't have access to charging necessarily. And as you're probably aware from living in the Bay Area, there is a strong correlation between how much money you make and how much you have to drive to get to your job. And as a result, I feel like these are important issues. And I met Judith Katz at Berkeley when I was at an event, and we are co-conspiring to put on this event. It's going to be at Wilson Sonsini Goodrich law firm. They're graciously hosting us. There's going to be a lot of today's law students and tomorrow's regulators there, and I'm hoping to get them interested in technology and what the impact of rapidly changing technology landscape is going to be on decarbonization and policy. So you guys should show up and be the technology end of it. It's going to be featuring some old friends of mine, including Ken Branson, who I used to work with, who is on Senator Josh Becker's staff, as well as Widra Ballur, who runs the carbon neutral program at my day job at Toyota Research Institute, Michael Randolph from the city of Oakland, and Louise Bedworth, who is the director of the Berkeley CLEE program, is going to moderate that. In addition, if you are not already signed up for the CTAN Substack, the Slow Moving Apocalypse, you can join. I embarked on a weekly writing project earlier this year. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it is always nice to know that I'm not screaming into the void. So I appreciate your comments and your feedback. I really enjoy writing about topics. I always like to start a little bit with some background on our topic. People who've been here know that I'm a physicist, and I love talking about climate tech because it is a deeply complex topic with a bunch of different stuff that you need to know in order to really understand what's going on. So I always like to introduce people to units. We often talk about kilowatts as a unit of power, but we're going to talk a little bit about kilowatt per square meter. So if you're standing in bright, direct sunlight, you are absorbing energy. And the amount of energy that you are absorbing, roughly speaking, is about a kilowatt of energy per square meter. If you look at the diagram on the bottom, you can see sunlight is a small part of the radio of the electromagnetic spectrum, everything down from microwaves up to gamma radiation and X-rays. We're going to be mostly talking about light, which falls right in the middle of that chart there, in the visible, the UV, and the IR, but it's all basically just electrical waves going up and down really fast. And to the right, you can see what 1 kilowatt looks like. About that is about an industrial microwave, is about a kilowatt. But you do not actually extract a kilowatt of energy per square meter using photovoltaics. This is a very confusing chart produced by NREL of the maximum efficiency of solar panels over time. You can see the bottom there is over the course of years. And there's a bunch of different technologies But mostly we're going to be focusing on the consumer ones, which fall in the range of about 15 to 20%, and we're going to be talking about how to push that and what that looks like practically speaking. One of the things I wrote earlier this year was I asked ChatGPT to write some stuff for us about solar panels because I don't know anything about solar. And I asked, what is the efficiency of a solar cell expressed as a percentage, and what are some Nicolas Cage movies with the same Rotten Tomatoes percentage? So expressed in Nicolas Cage movies, commercially available solar cells have approximately the efficiency of Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, Bangkok Dangerous, The Wicker Man, Next, and Outcast, to give you a grounding of what that percentage might mean. And so I am going to now turn it over to our panelists who are each going to have, actually I'm going to read to you first. No glasses? Okay. On our far left, oh man, I'm not going to do this right. Natasha Harold. Okay. Natasha Harold has worked at GIF Energy for 3 years. At GIF Energy, she manages the R&D team responsible for the solar cells, circuit formation, and metrology used in the product. Prior to her work at GIF Energy, she worked in solar cell R&D and manufacturing at SunPower. She earned her BSc in Material Science and Engineering at Cornell, an MSc in Materials at Oxford, and a PhD in Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Sitting next to Natasha is Jimmy Rayford from Noria. Prior to joining Noria Energy, Jimmy received his PhD in chemical engineering from Stanford University. During that time, James worked on new materials and fabrication techniques for next generation solar cells. As the head of technology development in Noria, James oversees the product and R&D teams. His focus is on reducing barriers to the deployment of floating solar in the US by introducing new innovations to market and studying the impact of these systems on water and the environment. And finally, Rohit Prasanna, Rohit, is that right?
Yeah.
Is a material scientist who's been working on a range of aspects of high energy perovskites since 2014. Perovskites?
Yeah.
Perovskites. He did his PhD at Stanford and at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. His early research projects focused on basic materials chemistry of the newly developed tin-lead perovskite material for all perovskite tandem solar. He was the first employee at Swift Solar starting in 2019. He now manages materials research and development, working at the intersection of materials and device stack development and its translation to manufacturing. He grew up in Bangalore, moved to New York City for college, and then to California for grad school. So I just want to point out, we have an immense amount of brain power up here right now, and I think you should all be impressed. So let's start again from the left. And is that good? Is that coming up? Is it blurry or is it just my eyes? Okay. So Natasha is going to talk a little bit about GIF Energy.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I have been at GIF Energy for over 3 years now. The company was founded in 2019, and our R&D facility, as well as our manufacturing, is just down in San Jose. So kind of our main product, you can see right there on the rooftop. We're in building integrated PV, or BIPV, and what we're leveraging here is our parent company, GIF, on the far left there, or sorry, far right. They're the #1 roofer in America today. So 1 out of 4 roofs in America has a GIF asphalt roof. So what we're able to do, actually, you can scroll to the next slide. What we're able to do is leverage that entire sales channel. So this is kind of our case for BIPV. I don't know if you can see it on the far left there. That's the residential solar PV system pricing today. That blue bar, that's all the soft costs, right? That's your customer acquisition, that's installing, that's the electricians getting there and plugging everything in. And that hardware is the brown bit. You can see that's That's come down a lot over time. That's huge because of some incredible manufacturing and incredible gains in efficiency. And so now what we have to do is really figure out how we can deploy things a lot faster and a lot cheaper. So if you go to the right, this is kind of another chart, kind of breaking that down. And the big green one, that's 20%, that's customer acquisition, right? And so you can kind of think of residential solar over time. Kind of the people who wanted to get solar mostly kind of gotten it, right? The environmentalists, the people who were really cost conscious and kind of took advantage of some of those rebates. So it's kind of getting harder and harder to get customers in residential. And then the orange bit there is kind of the overhead and installation costs. So again, this is something as JF Energy, we sell through just your neighborhood roofer, right? Your mom and pop roofer. We give them a product that they install with a nail gun and feels very familiar to roofers. And we don't have to do any of the 20% customer acquisition bit. So that's kind of how we're trying to drive down the overall costs, is by using that sales channel and by using the roofer as that labor cost. And kind of on top of that, I want to highlight just how it makes sense to get solar at the same time as you get a new roof, right? Your roof, if you have an asphalt roof, it needs to be replaced every 25 years. A little more frequently if you live in Florida, but generally speaking, every 25 years. So you don't want to get into a situation where you have a 15-year-old roof and then you install new solar on it. And then 10 years down the road, you're in this position of saying, oh shoot, I have to replace my asphalt roof. I don't want to have rain coming into my kitchen, but what do I do with my solar, right? So that's kind of also just from a logistical point of view, if you're a homeowner, you kind of want to get it one and done all at the same time. So I think we have a little, I don't know if this video is going to work. Oh.
Let me see what I can do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I exported this as a
PDF.
Oh, sorry.
I also had the final slide is just our general product. If the YouTube didn't come through. Yeah, so this is our product. It's a lot smaller and looks a bit different from your standard solar module, right? So you can see what we call the headlamp, that top bit right there. That's the top bit that they just install with a nail gun right across your roof. And the kind of interesting thing about being in the BIPV space is you have to work twice as hard because your solar module has to do two things, right? It has to be a water shedding and windproof material as well as generate electricity. So what we do is we've designed a product that installs like a normal asphalt roof and feels really natural to the roofer, and also has passed all of the fire tests, all of the wind tests, all of the rain tests, and all of the tests that I as a solar engineer never even imagined, but have had to learn about, and have designed this product now. So we have a 50 megawatt plant in San Jose, and we are starting to ramp our 500 megawatt plant in Texas later this year. So that's it.
Thank you. Something I want to mention that I forgot about before we move on is this is actually very important. I want to acknowledge Diana Nielsen, who's sitting in the front row here, who actually put this all together and came up with the questions. Diana, I really appreciate people helping put together these panels because this is my day job, and it really is awesome to have people who are in the industry who know people who help. And so thank you very much, Diana. I really appreciate it. I didn't want to forget to thank you. Oops, those are kids. They are cute. And so now Jimmy from Noria Energy is going to talk about that. All right.
Great, thanks. Hi everyone. My name is Jimmy. I work for Noria Energy. We are a company that specializes in floating solar, which is a relatively new sector of the solar industry, particularly in the US. It's much larger in Asia and Europe. There's over 3 gigawatts installed globally, and just now starting to come to the US. So it's an exciting new field. The company started, yeah, next slide, please, thank you. The company was founded in 2018. originally called Designo International, and was originally mainly focusing on project development, so finding new customers, designing systems, and installing them. And that led us to kind of developing a pipeline of around 50 megawatts of projects and installing and turning on some of the largest floating solar systems in North and South America. So the closest one is that we built in Healdsburg, up in a couple hours north of here. But working in the project development space really led us to find that there's a lot of room for innovation and ways to cost down floating solar and make it more accessible to more markets. And so since then, we've really started to ramp up some of our product efforts, working to improve these types of installations, and have recently got more money to work on that through the Department of Energy. So on the slide here, this is just kind of showing the wide range of customers and markets that we work in. So working from left to right there, on the left side is a lot of water agencies, so the city of Healdsburg, Turlock, Sweetwater, which is down near San Diego. We also work with a lot of agricultural customers, and then heavy industry, things like mining and chemical companies as well. Next slide. These are two recent projects that were developed by Noria. The left is on a wastewater treatment plant. That's the one in Healdsburg, California. It's just under 5 megawatts. And then we recently just turned on another project in Colombia on a hydroelectric reservoir, which is exciting because there's a lot of potential for these types of systems on larger reservoirs like that. And so there's also, you can kind of see in the upper left-hand corner of that photo, there's another smaller ground-mounted system there where we'll be able to do experiments and comparisons on production between floating and ground mount systems. And then the last slide here is just kind of showing some of the more recent product efforts that we're working on. We're working on a new type of racking system to reduce costs there, as well as a platform for enabling tracking of these systems, so rotating the arrays to track the sun and increase energy production, and then integrating these systems with different types of water treatment or water management equipment to help improve the bodies of water that they're installed on. So yeah, that's, and I realized I didn't put my contact information or anything on these slides, so you can get more information on the company just at noriaenergy.com, as well as just come up to me after and chat, and I can give you my contact info.
If all that's up, you can always contact me.
Yeah.
And finally, Swift Solar.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Rohit. I lead materials research and development at Swift Solar. I've been there since 2019, which is when we started building our R&D facility in San Carlos, which is where we're still based right now. And for background, if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We work on a family of solar cells based on materials known as perovskites, which some of you may have heard of. I see a lot of nods in the audience. There have really been approximately 5 to 6 major families of semiconductors that have been used successfully in solar panel production over the past 50 years. Silicon, the entry on the left, dominates the global solar market today. And most of the other families have been pursued at various times for specific advantages. And within the past 15 years or so, perovskites have garnered a lot of interest, mainly because they can combine the benefits of getting past the efficiencies that silicon is theoretically limited to, or any single junction solar cell is theoretically limited to, while still not requiring extremely high manufacturing costs in order to produce. And so perovskites and various combinations of perovskites with existing silicon solar cells, for instance, in tandem, are starting to look like what the future of solar beyond the present generation or beyond the next generation is going to look like. Next slide. And we're excited about perovskite tandem solar cells not only because of the potential for high performance and low costs, but also because you can put it in several places where solar would not have made sense in the past for various reasons. One is the hype of high efficiency, so the amount of energy you can harvest per unit area is higher because of the higher efficiency, and that means if you get past a certain efficiency, it makes more sense to cover the surface of an electric vehicle with solar, and you can actually generate an appreciable extension of the range that you can drive with an electric vehicle, for example. Space and unmanned aerial vehicles are other sort of early applications where there's a big premium on both high efficiency and lightweight. And in the long run, the goal is to produce gigawatts to terawatts of energy with solar and to do so at lower costs. And there's a variety of strategies to do that, and one important strategy is to increase the efficiency, the amount of energy you can produce per panel of solar that you have. And we're excited about, over the next few years, going after several of these applications down this roadmap. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we are somewhere between research and development stage and actual manufacturing at large scale. So perovskites are a very new class of materials. If you look closely at the chart that Matt showed right at the beginning of the efficiency of various families of solar cells over time, any perovskite solar cell related talk that you go to would love to show that chart as the first slide, because silicon solar cells and pretty much every other technology took something like anywhere between 10 and 40, 50 years to get to the efficiencies that it's at today. And perovskites made that rise kind of meteorically over the past like 5 to 7 years. And, or over the 5 to 7 years between 2013 and 2018-ish. And part of this is because it benefited from a lot of the research that had gone into other solar technologies, but a lot of it is also because perovskites are more tolerant to relatively cheap, inexpensive, quick and dirty manufacturing than a lot of other solar technologies. You can make a very defective perovskite and still have it perform very well in a solar panel, and that's partly responsible for high efficiencies that are very easy to reach. And so we have parallel operations in research and development. We have a strong R&D team that's pushing forward the device design and identifying improvements that will actually push forward the efficiency and push forward the long-term stability. And we've also recently commissioned a pre-pilot manufacturing line to manufacture actual full-size panels of this material. And the picture you see is one of the first panels that we made on this line. Still a work in progress, but it's exciting and a lot of progress is being made. Next slide. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're a team of 30, which is about 5 times the size as when I joined in 2019. And it's a lot of fun. Our mission is to make all energy clean energy, and this is one of the many exciting and promising directions that we hope will help get our community there. So, thank you.
Great, thanks guys. So what we have done here is try to put together a panel that I think has representatives from really across the industry, both from sort of project planning and residential and materials, so that we can really consider the whole vertical at once. So the questions that we have prepared are pretty general, and I think each of the panelists is going to have something different to contribute to those. So let me see. So technology. So what technology innovations have supported the growth of your company over the past 5 years? What have been the biggest technology innovations, and what are the biggest risks facing your business?
All at once. All right. Great.
Everybody, go.
To just start at the top of what technologies have really enabled our product, I would actually point a lot to the knowledge of GAF, our roofing parent company. So they're the #1 residential roofer in the country, and they're also the #1 commercial roofing company in the world, and in the nation. And so actually leveraging all the materials, the building materials, and the material science that makes a good building material waterproof has actually been really good for all of the solar geeks who know nothing about roofing and waterproofing. So that's, I would say actually from a BIPV perspective, having good knowledge of roofing materials is really fundamental. Or there were two more.
However you'd like to address it, it's just sort of a general question about what are the technologies that are currently enabling you, and what are the technologies that you're trying to sort of develop that you think are going to sort of bring about the next generation?
Yeah, you asked about technology risks, and I think one thing that has I've seen a lot is the lack of standardization across the solar industry. So when I started JF Energy, I was responsible for solar cell selection and qualification and all of that. At that time, and everyone here from Q Cells will have known, there's just been a really turbulent time of solar sizes, as well as now getting into different solar cell architectures. So if you're trying to make a 5-year product roadmap, and then people start changing wafer sizes every other year, it's really, really challenging to follow through on that path. And also just from a quality perspective, it's really hard to do all of like the thorough reliability testing that you need to do if the wafer form factor is changing every 1 to 2 years. So I would say that's one of the largest challenges that we've been kind of dealing with.
Yeah, I was going to say I really agree with the lack of standardization being a risk, particularly in floating solar. The equipment and the equipment requirements, installation procedures can vary differently depending on where you're installing, what type of equipment you're using to install. So there has been a lot of efforts to kind of standardize those, and I'd say another risk is just reliability. So putting solar arrays out on bodies of water for 20, 30 years, there's a lot of other factors that you need to consider in terms of the longevity of the systems that you wouldn't necessarily consider for a ground-mounted system. And so, yeah, I would say standardizing equipment and really defining the reliability requirements of the systems is something that's definitely a risk.
And what do you think sort of the biggest innovations that Noria has come up with that have really helped push the company forward?
Yeah, over the past 5-10 years, there definitely has been a lot of innovation around floating solar, particularly in things like the racking that supports the panels, and also things like how you anchor and moor the systems to make sure that they don't float away. Yeah, there's been a lot of innovation and cost down there, making it cheaper and trying to get it to be cost comparative with ground-mounted systems, but definitely still a lot of innovation to happen there. And yeah, like I said, that's something that we found early on when we were developing projects, and are excited to address those challenges in kind of our product efforts.
I think one of the things that always fascinates me about sort of the climate tech space is that like every problem is a scaling problem. And like everything is like, okay, that's great, you did it, now can you do it like 1,000,000 times exactly the same, reliably, without it breaking? And certainly with anything on the water, and it's a new field, that's a significant issue. It's one of the reasons that my day job, I like studying manufacturing, because it's basically that question writ large for everything.
As a research and development person, I feel like I should take some of the blame for the lack of standardization. but yeah, there is an aspect to there is an aspect to it that is like very fast changing, and we're always very excited about the latest development from some adjacent sector of solar research that we can incorporate into our devices to sort of combine benefits, as it were. And but actually, on a more serious note, like that is sort of the giants that on whose shoulders we're standing. Where there have been decades of research into organic solar cells, CIGS, cadmium telluride, silicon solar cells, and several different families of solar cells. And many of the materials and processing innovations that were discovered or invented for other kinds of solar cells are what enabled perovskites to really take off quickly. So several of the maybe not the perovskite layer itself, which is the heart of the solar cell and its light-absorbing layer, but the auxiliary layers on either side, the semiconductors that enable the solar cell to actually work, were typically originally developed for a different family of solar cells and adopted with relative ease because there had been 10 years of research on it beforehand. And that's been really something good to have had. Similarly, on the talent and manufacturing scale-up side, many of you probably know that California had a very large number of thin film solar startups over the 2000s and 2010s that get a lot of, I feel like, negative press for the headline fact that they went bankrupt. But I feel like that misses a very, very crucial part of the story, which is they generated a lot of really good IP and really good materials and manufacturing innovations that are really benefiting the current generation of solar as well. So, for example, like many of our senior process engineers worked at these companies for 10 years, for 20 years, and some of the builders of the pilot line that I showed just now came from companies like Soleil and Alta Devices, and these companies that really pioneered a lot of the manufacturing improvements that are benefiting newer industries today. And yeah.
Yeah, I think like Solyndra and the entire industry was really just like in large part a victim of like federal politics. It was just like a good albatross to hang around people's necks, and just like AI goes through like growth spurts and then AI winter and growth spurts and AI winter, climate tech goes through phases too, and we're back in the sort of throw money at everything phase. So it's a good time to be trying to get a job in this industry, which is why we do this, because all the tech people out here should be thinking, oh yeah, this is something I could work on. It's saving the planet, that sounds good. I can't accept your airdrop right now. That's the using my phone. So let's talk about marketing. What do you think the biggest challenges to scaling are?
I would say for GF Energy, it's training actually. We have a unique product, and although it sounds great on paper, making roofers solar installers, you do have to train them. And if you want to install across the country, that's a lot of different training programs, and also a lot of monitoring to make sure are you doing it right. And 'cause if you've ever been on a roof, it's really hot and you want to get off as soon as possible. And so yeah, we've kind of developed a lot of training programs, and that's going well, but it was slow to start.
Is there money in the IRA for developing training programs?
I'm not sure if we would benefit from that in particular. My hot take is actually the best part of the IRA is actually the number of people that will get involved and informed in solar. And so it's actually more about the training, in my opinion, that is like the big boom to the nation at large, rather than kind of the increased solar installation. Because yeah, thank goodness for those thin film companies that went bust. Like, I would not be able to employ anyone if they were still alive today. So and we really need bright people working in solar manufacturing and installation.
Yeah, I would say one of the bigger barriers to scaling for floating solar is education. There's I guess generally a sense of the like the not in my backyard kind of mentality, and not really understanding or knowing a lot about the technology, and so a lot of what we do actually is educating different types of organizations and different industries on the benefits of floating solar, which is not competing for land use, having distributed renewable generation on site, and the impact and the benefit these systems can have on bodies of water, from things like reduced evaporation, reducing harmful algal blooms that can impact your operations. So yeah, it's just educating and just really understanding how these systems would impact existing operations of the body of water, and how it could even benefit.
I think climate change is really a global problem, obviously, and I think a lot of the barriers to scaling up, especially a new solar technology that's still just getting out of the R&D stage right now, have to do with sort of national and geopolitical concerns that are preventing efficient exchange of information, of materials, of know-how, of equipment, those sorts of things, where the Chinese solar industry has massively scaled in between around 2008 and 2015, and I think it's very hard for anyone in the US really to appreciate the scale of how much it has scaled in such a short time. And it's not just that the solar manufacturing itself scaled up, it's also that the glass used to package the solar cells, the encapsulant materials, all of the like auxiliary components that are as crucial to scaling the whole technology as the panel itself successfully scaled. And I think there's definitely a risk of if there's a lot of talk of decoupling of supply chains now, and there is definitely a risk that it becomes a localized, like some countries and some industries successfully scale up while others don't. And I think the fewer such barriers that exist geopolitically in the coming decades, the easier it'll be for solar technologies everywhere to scale. And to give a more specific example from our experience, there's a wide range of major components that we have no plans to produce because it would be far too much for one company to do, but that are not trivial to source locally. And I think that's one of the biggest risk factors that the IRA faces, where it is a budget of historic proportions as far as US support for renewable energy goes. But the problem could be even bigger than that, where the swath of industries and communities that it seeks to support might just not be enough to really ensure that all of the barriers are crossed that require that solar would need to scale.
Yeah, it's a highly interconnected process, and you can't manufacture all of it, but we're explicitly trying to sort of decouple ourselves from the people who manufacture these things.
Yeah. It's a challenge.
So this is a good question. Thanks, Simon. How do you define success from an impact perspective over a 1, 5, 10-year time horizon? Like, do you think about it in terms of gigawatts deployed, CO2 reduced? Obviously, there's financial, business. You know, we obviously support we're at Climate Tech Action now. We support I personally support the view that if we're not going to destroy global capitalism in the next 20 years, so we have to build companies that sort of operate within. So I don't think sort of like surviving as a company that makes money is a negligible goal. But I am actually interested in sort of like what kind of impact you hope to have, and what you think sort of like the total scale of that impact could be if you sort of got deployed to the level that you think it was reasonable for your market.
So in R&D, I'd say year one is just learning about how the product behaves in the field, right? We started aggressively installing early last year, and so we've learned a lot, and I want to take that knowledge and develop a better product off of it for the next version. For 5 to 10 years, I really want homeowners to just have solar as a default decision when they get a new roof, right? I think that we've seen it with EVs, right? If you go back 5 years ago, like no one had an EV, right? And now, a large portion of Californians today have EVs. It's extremely normalized, and I think that we need to get to that place with building integrated PV. And GAF, I think, is well positioned just in the, I think Jimmy and I are in a space where, we just want to deploy as much as possible, right? We're just trying to get as many megawatts in the field as possible. And if you can convert 10% of GAF roofs every year to solar roofs, you're immediately the #1 installer in America, just point blank. And so I think that, in the next 5 to 10 years, that's what we would be targeting.
What is 10% of? And I apologize if you don't want to know, do the math off the top of your
No,
head.
it's,
But it, like, let's say as an example, like say 10% of GAF roofs. What is that in terms of gigawatts?
It's oh gosh, so it's over 1 million homes is the entire number of installed roofs in America with the GAF roof, right? So 100,000 homes getting solar would be a good healthy target that we're chasing. Like not every roof has the amount of irradiance that would make solar make sense. Like we totally recognize that, but it should be a pretty rational decision. Like a lot of people are really seriously thinking about buying an EV and buying EVs because it just makes sense.
And for I apologize if you don't have the numbers off the top of your head. I'm curious because I like talking about numbers. A typical house with sort of GAF silicon-based solar, what is that in terms of
Yes,
kilowatts?
6 to 8 kilowatt system. Got a
Is
really big McMansion, like 10 to 12K, but 10 to 12 kilowatts would be a larger house, but 6 kilowatts is pretty standard.
And that's pretty comparable to the power consumption of an American house during daylight hours. Cool. Jimmy?
Yeah, I think in the short term, in like the 1 year timeline, in this kind of the slide that I had showed before, I mentioned we're really starting to develop some products that can help lower costs and innovate in the floating solar space, and we've over the past year and a half been kind of deploying our first pilots out in the field and collecting data on them, and I think within the next year we're looking to scale those to more commercial pilots, like Natasha said, just collect as much field data as we can. Longer term, 5 to 10 year plan, I think the potential for floating solar to scale in the US is huge, and Nori would love to be the market leader of floating solar products and systems, not only in the US but in the Americas and globally. And I think overall as a field, in the next 5 years, what I would also like to see is some more specific studies on really understanding the impact of how these systems, how they impact the surrounding environment and the water and the ecosystems that we put them in. I think currently there are some studies, but limited, and I think that's an important aspect of these types of systems that I think in 5 years we'll have better answers to. And I think also in that 5 year timeline, I think it's not impossible that floating solar is at the gigawatt scale in the US, kind of mirroring growth trends that are seen in Asia and Europe. So I think it's longer term. Also just something that we're really interested in is the ability for these systems to sit at the intersection of energy and water and really kind of impact both and positively. And so also kind of seeing more organizations, communities align those goals, and using floating solar to do so is something that I'd love to see.
Both the examples that you gave of current projects are obviously man-made freshwater reservoirs. Is this a technology that can scale to saltwater, to oceans?
Yes, there are the large majority of systems are in fresh bodies of water. Just the engineering challenges are much less. They get a lot harder when you put it out in the ocean. There are some companies that are looking at larger systems, more robust systems for the ocean. Those systems tend to mirror the designs of like offshore rigs, and they're just much larger pieces of infrastructure. But I think for offshore, the potential for offshore floating solar and pairing it and installing it near existing and new offshore wind facilities and leveraging that infrastructure is an interesting idea, and I think that's where a lot of those companies are going with it.
People who have sort of been following some of the recent press about this, that one of the biggest barriers to installing new renewables is actually interconnection to the grid. And so if you co-locate with existing infrastructure, it takes a lot of pressure off of the grid operators to sort of build new interconnects, presumably, as long as it can handle the power.
Yeah, that's a great point. In the second project that I showed on the hydroelectric reservoir, it's next to hydroelectric power plant and co-located and is able to leverage the infrastructure from that hydroelectric plant. And so the more projects that are installed and research that's done to kind of figure out how to optimize those two sources of power, which are actually quite complementary in terms of if you think of a place like Columbia in the rainy season, it's typically not as sunny, so you can run the hydroelectric power plant to produce most of your energy. In the dry season, when there's not a lot of water and water shortages, that's when the solar is producing most of its power. So there's a lot of complementary nature just in terms of energy production, but also leveraging the same infrastructure.
Cool. Rohit?
Yeah, I think for us, success in the near term looks like successfully manufacturing what we have shown already to be possible on small scale. As of just a couple weeks ago, there were some new academic papers that showed really like well above 30% efficiencies with perovskite silicon tandems. And achieving that on actual sizes that matter, like the wafer, the picture of the wafer that I showed, is what the one year time horizon for us looks like. And a big part of that, for me personally, I think success also looks like building a good team, a strong, cohesive team that hangs together through a lot of ups and downs, because that's what research is like, and has fun while doing it. That's what near term success looks like. And then in the long term, longer term than that, I think putting solar in places that you don't typically see solar today is what success looks like for me. I'm very much a believer that we're not going to solve climate change by one major technology that scales to a terawatt scale. It's going to be actually everything. Every single solution that we can possibly think of today is going to have to scale to its full potential in order for us to make a dent in climate change. And being some small part of that would be a huge honor for Swift.
So rather than say replacing sort of the existing base of sort of silicon solar, it sounds like you envision perovskite solar in the near term, sort of sweeping up the long tail of smaller deployments where it makes more sense. But then as silicon solar starts to age out, what would you say the sort of typical lifetime of like a rooftop solar system is?
I mean, most warranties are 25 years. Yeah, that's pretty standard.
So in the 10 to 20 year time scale, people are going to be replacing that with more advanced solar as that kind of rolls out to production, right?
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that solar is the fastest growing new source of electricity, if I remember right, in the US at least. And but that said, it is still a small fraction of all electricity that is generated. And so for the foreseeable future, for several years now, there's going to be a lot of capacity to absorb new technology. So we're not going to, I don't think we have to get to the point of replacing existing technologies for many years now.
There's a lot of room to grow there, yeah.
There is a lot of room to grow. And the focus on sort of newer markets and smaller niches, I think, is partly also for the practical reason of there's a pretty steep learning curve in terms of learning what is going to go wrong and gathering data, like what Natasha and Jenny said. And some of the smaller, higher margin markets allow the company to scale more successfully and become revenue positive, and those sorts of more practically important things, because it is a path dependent process to get to gigawatt solar.
I wrote about this. I haven't posted this one yet. I tried to stay a couple weeks ahead of my deadline, but I wrote a little bit about how the challenge of scaling is always trying to figure out one market that you can target that sort of is going to allow you to get a foothold and sort of actually test out all your processes and your manufacturing and your sales and your maintenance and everything. So in batteries, that tends to be personal electronics and medical devices where higher energy density is really important before people start building things for cars, which requires like much larger manufacturing facilities, much other things. So one more question before we turn to audience questions. I'm sure there's a lot of really good audience questions. And I like asking this at a lot of panels, is if you had one wish to change the regulatory regime that you think would accelerate your company's capability to decarbonize the economy, what would it be?
actually, I'm gonna repeat what I said earlier about workforce training and incentivizing local manufacturing. You know, where I learned to manufacture solar cells was in Malaysia when I was working at SunPower, right? And you know, I share your love for manufacturing, but it can also make you want to tear your hair out. And it's a different way of thinking, and it made me really realize how little of that we have in America, right? Like, I had to go to Malaysia to really kind of learn everything there. And the thing I'm most excited about with the Inflation Reduction Act is just, you know, the number of engineers that are going to be working in solar manufacturing are going to triple thanks to the IRA, and that's huge. Like, if we miss that window of kind of passing down that knowledge to the next generation, like, that in some ways is almost a bigger loss than, you know, the solar manufacturing here. So yeah, more training programs, yeah, and more subsidies for manufacturing in the US.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really illuminating about working at Toyota is that learning to make things like infrastructure, cars, anything, is like a lifetime of learning. And we've lost like a generation of learning about how to manufacture a lot of different things and how to build infrastructure in this country. And I'm really excited for the IRA to sort of like give us a chance to kind of like step on a bunch of rakes so that we can learn how to do it again. Because it's gonna, like, you know, we're gonna need a lot of like $100 billion over budget trains to sort of like get back to that point where we were in the Eisenhower administration.
And I think it's interesting with like the rise of machine learning and ChatGPT and all that, like, you know, software engineers, I'm not gonna say they're obsolete, they're not, but like also I cannot get machine learning to fix my broken tool. Like, I just can't. And so like I really hope that there's a resurgence of, you know, mechanical engineers, material scientists, and you know, getting into hardware, because that's not going to be anywhere, right?
I will talk to you after this about how to use machine learning on manufacturing. This is a whole area of research that I agree is completely underdeveloped. It is horrendously underdeveloped. It is a very difficult problem. That's why it's interesting.
Yeah, I mentioned the importance of education before, and I think what would really help you know, our Nori's industry in floating solar is policies and regulation that that incentivize government agencies, water authorities to really understand the impact that floating solar could have. And a good example of this is last year, Congress passed the Power Our Reservoirs Act, co-sponsored by Congress people in both California and New York. And what it kind of mandated was that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation and other water agencies really do detailed studies to investigate the impact that that floating solar could have on large reservoirs in the U.S., which is a huge untapped market. Just the sheer surface area of reservoirs is gigawatts alone, and disseminate that knowledge of the findings to the public and to other organizations that might be interested. And I think more policies that you know, provide funding or enable companies like Nori and other companies to deploy pilots so that these organizations can get familiar with the technology and understand its benefits, and providing renewable energy is something that happened last year, and I would like to see more of.
I think a sort of meta view I have on regulation is that I think it misses a lot of the flexibility that would make it address the things that it is trying to address without causing as much collateral damage in the process. And the example I always think about with this is the solar relevant example is that there are two major sticking points while importing silicon solar cells from China into the US. One of them is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is targeted at reducing the prevalence of forced labor in Xinjiang that is thought right now to produce a lot of the raw material silicon that goes into a lot of solar panels.
In Xinjiang, did you say?
Xinjiang.
Sorry, so this is where the Uyghurs are being interned.
And the second is the second major obstacle to importing silicon solar cells is the tariffs that have been imposed by several presidents in succession, several different administrations in succession at this point. And I feel like those two policies in my head are completely different in tension, right? Like I think it is, I obviously think it's super important to ensure that the supply chain is sustainable and humane and maintains human rights. I think that tariffs have been used as a bit of a political football in a lot of ways, and I think there is insufficient consistency in the objective behind which regulations are imposed. And I think adapting this to changes in the industry and adapting this as we continue to learn what the industry actually needs in order to thrive is what is likely to make that successful rather than an obstacle.
I gotta say, I did not expect a solar startup to be sort of very free trade oriented, but that's really interesting to hear that you think that sort of the current attempts at sort of regulating the trade are actually harming the U.S. industry.
Yeah, I mean it's complicated. Is
Yeah,
the point?
exactly.
I think
This is why we're here in this room. It's really complicated.
It's complicated in the sense of I think there is a good case for domestic solar manufacturers in the U.S. to argue for protections against cheap solar panels that might flood the market, but at the same time it does act as an obstacle as well. So for example, we one of the projects that we work on are perovskite silicon tandems, and there is just no silicon manufacturing in the U.S. To speak of, and there are small lines here and there, but the U.S. lags even behind Germany and the U.K. in terms of the presence of silicon manufacturing in Europe, let alone China, and so. Recognizing exactly what the industry needs is crucial to crafting good regulation.
Makes sense. So, great. I want to take questions from the audience, and Jerry, you have your hand up already, so go for it.
Okay, do I have
Sure.
Okay, sorry, I didn't.
No.
Yeah. First, thank you so much for the sharings, the host and three speakers. I think I was particularly interested in supply chain aspect that you guys mentioned, because I'm a startup founder. I'm from China, actually. I'm from Chengdu, the hometown pandas. I went to Harvard for undergrad, but then COVID happened, so I was doing my own, scope 3, value chain, supply chain, carbon footprint. And we're actually working, so for me, I was in China for the past 3 years of COVID. We work with Tongwei, we work with JA Solar, the big ones, Trina Solar in China. And so I know a little bit about the businesses in this industry. But I'm curious, you mentioned a very good point. One, supply chain. It is very turbulent right now. And second, because of all those acts, IRA, European Green Deal, and a bunch of local, state, and national acts, it's kind of hindering the supply chain moving freely between continents. And three, as you guys mentioned, supply chain is very complicated. Apart from the price and quality, it's also we have the other footprint on the human rights, on the what is their carbon footprint of those tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, forced labor, etc. So, and different countries have different standards as well when it comes to accounting, carbon accounting, and Europe had the EPD, and Macron, they have the new directive on all the new solar panels entering the French public bid market. You have to have the life cycle carbon footprint report.
Jerry, I'm going to have to ask you a question.
Yeah, the question is, how do you guys deal with all this complexity in supply chain? What's your mechanism? What's your team? And what's the biggest issue in your supply chain management? Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
I just,
Just trying to prevent people from stumping for the company sometimes.
So we've got a lot of lawyers, that's number one. No, but in all seriousness, I started at JF Energy in 2020, and that was kind of when a lot of these new regulations were coming into effect. And, it was a turbulent time, and a lot of vendors who we talked to, they say, we don't even know what forms to fill out, there was a lot of unknowns. I would say that I've actually been really impressed with, I see things getting more steady now, and I actually am kind of seeing the light in the tunnel and kind of seeing the benefits of some of, at least on the forced labor side of issues. I've seen the benefits now of this regulation. Now it's just standard. Everyone has full traceability of their cells. It's you ask and it's just a no-brainer. I think there's been a lot more of an expansion of polysilicon production outside of the Xinjiang region. There's been a lot more polysilicon production Wacker and kind of non-China manufacturing. Also, if there's a question about cells, now I've seen, great videos from wafers coming into the cell fab to testing and pack out. And that's like a level of visibility I don't think anyone can say about any of the products they buy. You can't say that about your avocados, your iPhones, anything, right? And so like, I've actually been really impressed that it is still hard, we're still kind of getting out of that turbulent time, but like, it's gotten way, way better since 2020. So there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I can just kind of echo the sentiments as a smaller startup company that was trying to develop solar projects in 2020. In the past couple of years, definitely the supply chain was an issue. The added costs from tariffs or just logistic costs as well. Certainly, made some projects start to not to pencil for everyone, and it's definitely getting better. But I think in addition to the solar panels themselves, there's things like the IRA I think are going to help drive domestic manufacturing of the other components of these systems. So things like racking and the other electrical components, which I think will help a lot in that space and being less reliant on international logistics.
I think echoing a similar sentiment, spreading around the risk across many different suppliers is, it's a very textbook answer. I don't know how to manage risk, like diversify as much as possible, but that's sort of the dominant approach there. Yeah, and sometimes that's hard because sometimes it is just one single player that dominates the production of some specific component, and that is, you kind of just have to accept it sometimes.
Other questions? Wow. Well, Jimmy, I'm actually quite interested in what you do know about the way in which.
There's 2 questions.
Are there? Who's raising their hands? Oh, I didn't see you raising your hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so sorry, I just raised my hand slowly. Like how we progress. So just being curious in terms of what's your plan or vision for recycling some of the materials over there?
Oh, recycling. Okay, cool.
So the one of the large I think areas for improving or really thinking about recyclability for something like floating solar is in the racking. So it's currently made with these like large rigid floats, which are made from high density polyethylene. And so if you have megawatt scale arrays, you have tens of thousands of these plastic floats, and so I think it's important for the suppliers and providers of that type of racking to be thinking about and integrating like recycled plastics and thinking of life cycle and end of use of these systems, and how all the plastic that goes into making the floats is going to be reused or repurposed after the lifetime of the array.
I think there's 2 aspects to, I'm not an expert on recycling, but my basic understanding is that there's 2 major aspects to think about. One is it being important to not put certain materials that might be hazardous into landfill, and the second is the economics of recovering important components that might be scarce in the first place. For solar, there are a few components that are potentially going to be scarce when we scale to terawatt sort of deployments. Most of the components I don't think fall into that category. It's a small subset of materials that might fall into that category. But it definitely similar to a lot of electronics, it falls into the category of, there are several materials that you don't want to be putting in landfill in large scale. And most of the talk in the regulatory and industry spaces around this are around requiring companies to have a buyback or an accepting back program to recycle panels at the end of their life or manage their disposal at the end of their life. I'm not I don't have very much visibility into how well they work right now. We're a bit of a ways away from that being the problem. It will be a big success if that becomes our biggest problem. So I can't comment on that, on how well it's working so far. My guess is that First Solar is probably the biggest company that has to deal with these sorts of things, both because of the combination of deployment and the presence of cadmium and tellurium, both of which, like, one is hazardous and one is scarce. And so I'd be curious, but I don't know very much about it.
Yeah, and for GF Energy, we just launched our products last year, and so that was kind of the primary focus, and it's an area we're actively exploring right now, and we're spending a lot of time and resources on. And in our parent company, GAF, they've already developed recyclable asphaltic shingles and have generated shingles, new shingles using recycled asphalt. So I think from a building materials perspective, we probably leverage their knowledge. But on the PV side, that's an area we're actively working on. If they hold up to their 25-year warranty, we shouldn't have to recycle too many anytime soon.
Thank you.
I would actually love to run an entire panel on recycling, in large part because most of sort of the American municipal recycling is so ass backwards. We waste a lot of carbon on very stupid stuff, and there's just like absolutely no penalty for like mixing your garbage, and so people do it really poorly. And I would love to actually get some people who actually understand recycling up here to talk about like which recycling are we doing that actually makes sense. Hey, you want to? You're okay, great. Which recycling are we doing that actually makes sense? Aluminum makes sense. Paper sort of makes sense. Plastic is kind of disaster. And like, what should we actually be doing? And what are the technologies on the horizon, like automated sorting and things that are actually gonna, possibly bend those cost curves? And like, people can think about recycling as being a carbon footprint issue, but like in a lot of cases, it's just not. Aluminum, I think, if I understand correctly, is the biggest carbon footprint material and makes a lot of sense to recycle and kind of everything else, sort of. All right, was there another question over in this area that I missed?
Just was highlighting hers.
Okay, any other questions from around here? Okay, great,
I'm
James.
just kind of curious about the roof, like how much does it cost for, like I'm doing a 1,500 square foot roof, how much is it?
It's asking for a quote right here.
I'm curious.
I'm gonna cop out and say no. It's cheaper than retrofit, once you kind of bake in all of those costs, but I'm gonna claim ignorance on the R&D side, but I don't actually do sales, sadly. No, I'm such a great salesperson.
There were a couple back here somewhere. Oh, Aaron, yeah.
Maybe this is a more general question about solar, but when you get a solar roof, they make this big deal that, you have to have it operate for 6 years until you make your money back. Okay, or whatever that is. But in terms of climate impacts, how long does a solar panel or solar roof or solar system need to operate before it offsets the climate cost of its manufacture?
That's a really good question. So I haven't done this calculations myself. I would say it's much lower for the GF Energy shingle, just because we don't have the frame, right? The frame is actually incredibly energy intensive, right? To make that metal frame. Because we have a frameless module, I imagine that the carbon offset is far earlier than that, but I don't have a clear date for you. I'm sorry.
I also haven't done the calculation, so I'm not entirely sure of the exact environmental payback period. But I think there's a general sentiment or push to reduce those frame and racking the environmental impact of manufacturing those. So moving away from our industry moving away from big bulky plastic floats, which are injection molded, which is a really high energy intensive process, to more lower energy manufacturing processes. But yeah, I haven't done the math either. But I probably should.
it is much, like, an order of magnitude smaller than the 25-year lifetimes that are typically quoted as economic payback times. I also don't know the exact numbers, but it is in the ballpark of 1 to 3 years rather than 20 to 25 years. And yeah, the impact, the energy impacts of the cell itself largely scales as what temperature you process the cell at. And that's one of the benefits of perovskites is that they process at lower temperatures, but also raising the efficiency of the cell immediately scales that down pretty directly.
Assuming you hold the carbon footprint constant.
Yes.
I guess we got time for one more question maybe, and then we can have some more networking time before people go. Any other questions? Oh yeah, great. This side of the room hasn't asked any.
What do you all think is the biggest barrier in the value chain for the US to get terawatt scale solar in the next, let's say, decades?
Do you want to clarify what you mean by in the value chain?
I mean, do you think it could be like, do you think it's material, it's workforce training, it's like, from your vantage point, what are you most worried about for the US to reach that scale?
Well, I know what Natasha's worried about.
Well, I'd say the near term, actually imports is, I know I painted a rosy picture that things are getting better, but like importing is still pretty hard for anyone who does installations. I don't know if you saw, but like last year, a lot of people kind of scaled back the number of modules and kind of megawatts that they were going to install this year, just because of the challenge of importing. So in the near term, I'd say the biggest challenge is kind of regulatory and getting modules into the country. I think long term, in my view, it is kind of the staffing factor of kind of how are we going to staff those manufacturing facilities, and how are we going to install, or how are we going to train up tens and tens of thousands of electricians.
I love the idea of retraining people, and I also question whether it is actually going to work. But I'm not an expert on it.
I think this maybe might not just be solar specific, but distributed renewables in general. I think long term, I think expanding and retrofitting the distribution network for distributed renewables. I think to get to the terawatt scale, there's a lot of new infrastructure and costs that will need to go into beefing up the grid to be able to handle that. So I think that's a big a big thing to address to get to terawatt scale.
And that was actually our last panel, was on grid infrastructure, and I learned a whole lot of super interesting stuff about distributed microgrids and sort of the incredibly complex challenges there.
I think developing the manufacturing ecosystem is one of the main challenges because, like I said, there's a very large number of components that go into building a terawatt scale factory or a gigawatt scale factory even. And like Matt said, we've in the US we've really missed one whole generation of developing these sorts of auxiliary manufacturing capabilities, and that includes materials, that includes know-how, that includes equipment making. There are a few equipment companies in the US, but they certainly don't dominate in the solar space. And also workforce development. I think the US is probably not the worst hit right now with the demographic crisis that some other developed, like highly economically developed countries are facing, but it is fast getting there. And I think things like workforce, things like retraining, things like increased integration, things that will increase the available workforce, I think will be crucial to the US just being able to do any of that.
And I will just put in a bid for my answer to that, which is similar, which is that I think the US is behind on manufacturing, and scaling depends on manufacturing, project management, but I believe that there is potentially room for the US to actually leverage information technology in ways that are not available necessarily to other countries because we are advanced. We have a lot more resources in that respect, and I'm very much hoping that in the next 5 to 10 years we will learn much better about how to do anybody here who knows anything about machine learning will understand this problem, that it's very easy to build something that tells you if inputs are X, then you should expect to see Y, but it is very difficult to say, given my outputs are Y, what should my X's be? And that is the manufacturing problem that I am hoping to tackle, and I just wanted to end there with a little plug. I am hiring for my team. If you have a solid software engineering background and some data science chops and are clever and want to work on EV batteries, please come talk to me. I know you seem very eager to ask questions, so I think we got time for one more.
Thank you. I noticed nobody mentioned the utility side as being a barrier, but with the recent changes to net metering, especially in California, and other places considering it, how are you addressing that or thinking about it?
Yeah, I think in addition to things like the changes to net metering, which definitely.
Can you explain what that is? I actually don't use those.
Yeah, I can. As far as I understand it, and maybe Natasha and Rhea can add to it, but essentially the credit for selling energy back to the grid from solar used to be at a predefined rate, and it was recently it was lowered so the value of that energy for selling back to the grid is, and what you're compensated for is much lower, as well as just to install like a residential solar system at a home. There's additional fixed costs that add to doing that, and so it, I guess in a sense, de-incentivized it a little bit. I guess is that, yeah. I think again, it's also like with the IRA, it's a complicated, the tariffs, it's a complicated issue for sure, because there's a lot of different players, the utility and the solar industry. So, but in addition to that, I would say another big thing is the interconnection process and interconnection queue for solar projects. There's a big backlog in the US, and so coming up with better processes and ways of getting more projects through that queue faster, I think will also help accelerate deployment.
Yeah, and I would add, still the majority of solar installed is still utility, right? And so if the utilities own the solar plants or, right, have, like, it doesn't matter as much. I think one other thing is net metering, in theory, seems to advocate for more storage, right? Which I don't think any of us, that was a blind spot for all of us, but storage, yes, that's a huge barrier. And what I am hoping is that people who are in the battery space are going to drop that cost of storage significantly, because the less that residential folks have to deal with utilities, the better, right? The more independent you can become, the better. So I am kind of counting on battery prices to come down significantly. They're not there yet, and I think that would kind of address that question.
And to build on what Natasha said, I think, yeah, storage is super important, and it's not even just batteries, it's also hydrogen, it's also solar fuel production and those sorts of things, which might be a little further out. But for example, right now, as far as I know, that there is no storage technology where it is a no-brainer for if you have abundant and basically free solar in the middle of the afternoon when you're not using all of it. There is no technology that it makes sense to funnel all of that into storing. And at least not all of the time, not enough to put the capex costs into a hydrogen production plant or an aluminum electrolysis plant or something of that sort, right? And I think reducing the capex costs of those big, major, like large-scale storage projects is going to be a huge complement to solar.
And that was, in fact, the topic of our very first CTAN that was on new storage technologies. So I'd like everybody to thank our panelists, please. I want to say that I really appreciate every single person who comes out to participate in the panel, because all these people are working at startups, and anybody who's worked at a startup knows that it is quite a grind, and probably at this hour you're probably all exhausted already, but also the other important thing about working at a startup is making sure people know what you're doing. So thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it. And we have a hard stop at 9, but feel free to mingle until then. And the bar closes at 8:30, so I'm gonna have one last drink.
Thank you to Matt for organizing.